In May 1945, the world held its breath as Allied forces closed in on Berlin. History tells us that the European war ended with Germany's surrender on May 8, followed by Japan's capitulation in August after the atomic bombings. But what if circumstances had been different? What if the conflict had dragged on, reshaping not just the immediate post-war world, but the entire trajectory of the 20th century? Today, we explore an alternate timeline where the Second World War continued beyond 1945, examining the political, technological, and human consequences of a prolonged global conflict that would fundamentally alter the world we know. Before we get into the details, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us continue bringing you these important historical stories. In our alternate timeline, imagine if the German leadership had successfully retreated to the heavily fortified Alpine regions of southern Germany and Austria, creating what military planners called the National Redoubt. This mountainous fortress, supplied through hidden networks and defended by fanatical remnants of the German military, could have prolonged the European conflict by months or even years. The Allies would have faced a brutal mountain warfare campaign, reminiscent of the Italian campaign but far more treacherous. Supply lines would stretch thin across bombed-out Europe, while partisan warfare erupted behind Allied lines. The human cost would have been staggering, not just in military casualties, but among civilian populations caught in the crossfire. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, having borne the brunt of the Eastern Front's devastation, might have pushed even harder westward, leading to earlier and more dramatic confrontations with Western Allied forces. The seeds of the Cold War, already planted, would have sprouted amid active combat rather than diplomatic tension. In this drawn-out conflict, technological and scientific advancements might have accelerated at an even faster pace, as both sides scrambled for any advantage to break the stalemate. The US could have been pressured to deploy nuclear weapons earlier and in greater numbers, potentially targeting fortified mountain strongholds instead of cities like Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Such a scenario would not only have reshaped the moral and political debates surrounding nuclear warfare but also risked catastrophic environmental destruction in the Alps. The prolonged war would have delayed Europe's reconstruction, deepening famine and disease, and creating a refugee crisis of unprecedented scale. By the time hostilities finally ended, the geopolitical map of Europe might have been drastically altered, with Soviet influence extending deeper into Central Europe and the Western Allies struggling to maintain a foothold. In the Pacific, consider if Japan's surrender had not come in August 1945. Without the shock of atomic weapons, or if those weapons had failed to convince the Japanese leadership, Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan, would have commenced in November 1945. Military estimates suggested this invasion could have cost over 1 million Allied casualties and several million Japanese lives. The Japanese civilian population, trained for total resistance, would have faced unimaginable hardship. Every city, every village, every home could have become a battlefield. The psychological impact on both sides would have been profound. American and Allied forces, already war-weary after years of island-hopping campaigns, would have faced the prospect of urban warfare against a population fighting for their homeland's very existence. A prolonged war would have dramatically accelerated technological development. Both sides were on the verge of revolutionary advances in 1945. German scientists were developing advanced rocket technology and experimental aircraft designs. The Allies were refining radar, computing, and nuclear technology. Extended conflict would have pushed these innovations forward at breakneck speed. We might have seen the development of more sophisticated missiles, early computers for military applications, and advanced aircraft designs years ahead of our timeline. The space race might have begun as a military necessity rather than Cold War competition. Medical advances, driven by the urgent need to treat massive casualties, could have progressed rapidly. Blood banking, surgical techniques, and pharmaceutical development would have advanced under the pressure of sustained warfare. Such relentless technological acceleration, however, would have come at an immense human cost. The intense focus on military innovation would likely have diverted resources away from civilian needs, leaving devastated cities and starving populations without relief. Ethical considerations around scientific experimentation might have been abandoned entirely, leading to dangerous human testing programs and reckless deployment of unproven weapons. The militarization of space and computing could have set the stage for a post-war world where surveillance and warfare technologies dominated everyday life far earlier than in our history. In this alternate future, humanity's leap forward in science and medicine would have been shadowed by a much darker legacy, a world rebuilt not on peace, but on the technologies of total war. The ripple effects across the world would have been enormous. Colonial empires, already weakened by war, might have collapsed even more rapidly as European powers remained focused on the continuing conflict. Independence movements in Asia and Africa could have gained momentum sooner, but under more chaotic circumstances. The United Nations, formed in San Francisco in 1945, would have faced its first major test not as a peacetime organization, but as a body attempting to coordinate ongoing military operations. The entire concept of international cooperation might have developed along different lines. Economically, the continued war effort would have further strained national resources. The post-war economic boom that characterized the late 1940s and 1950s would have been impossible. Instead, we might have seen continued rationing, industrial mobilization, and economic hardship extending well into the late 1940s. Perhaps most tragically, the human cost would have been catastrophic. Millions more military personnel and civilians would have perished. Entire cities might have been reduced to rubble. The terror and other wartime atrocities could have continued longer, claiming even more innocent lives. Families separated by war would have endured additional years of uncertainty and loss. An entire generation of children would have known nothing but conflict and hardship. The psychological scars on societies worldwide would have run even deeper than they did in our timeline. Women, who had entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers during the war, might have found their roles even more permanently altered. Social changes that took decades in our timeline could have been compressed into these additional years of crisis. This alternate history reminds us of the profound impact that key historical moments have on human civilization. The end of World War II in 1945, while still leaving a devastated world to rebuild, allowed for the relatively rapid recovery and unprecedented prosperity that followed. The world we know today, with its international institutions, technological advances, and social progress, emerged from the specific circumstances of how and when that global conflict ended. Sometimes, in understanding what might have been, we better appreciate what actually was, and the countless individual acts of courage and sacrifice that brought one of humanity's darkest chapters to its close. Perhaps most importantly, this exploration serves as a reminder of how fragile peace truly is, and how the decisions made by leaders and ordinary citizens alike in moments of crisis can alter the course of history for generations. The world that emerged from 1945 was shaped not just by victory and defeat, but by the wisdom to choose reconstruction over continued destruction, cooperation over perpetual conflict, and hope over despair. In studying this alternate timeline, we gain a deeper appreciation for the remarkable resilience of the human spirit and the power of collective decision-making in shaping our shared destiny. The choice to end the war in 1945, despite the many unresolved tensions and injustices that remained, represented a turning point where humanity chose to step back from the abyss and begin the long journey toward healing. Every peace treaty signed, every institution built, every hand extended in reconciliation after 1945 represented a conscious rejection of this darker alternative we have explored today. In understanding what might have been, we honor what was, and perhaps more importantly, we arm ourselves with the knowledge to ensure that such profound darkness never again engulfs our world. As we close this exploration of an alternate history, we must remember that the future remains unwritten, and the lessons of what might have been in 1945 remain relevant today. The same human impulses toward both destruction and creation, hatred and compassion, despair and hope, continue to shape our world. The technologies we have imagined being accelerated by extended warfare are now part of our daily lives, developed thankfully in times of relative peace. The international institutions that might have failed under the pressure of continued conflict have instead grown and evolved to help prevent such catastrophic wars. Yet the fragility remains, and our responsibility to choose peace over conflict, cooperation over competition, and understanding over hatred is as critical now as it was in those pivotal moments of 1945 when the world chose to turn away from the abyss.